and then he just turned it on at the end. And that's what you always talked about, was peaking at the right time, right? It's like in a fight, it's different because it's just that you're training for that one 15 to 30-minute moment, right? In football, it's like this long, crazy marathon. You would get us ready in the off season, and then by the time training camp came, it was like, okay, now we're in training camp. You can't burn yourself out before you go to training camp. So you would just like build us up. And I always felt like that's why I started training with you. Because after that, in 2014, I played my best football that next season. In 2015, we won a Super Bowl because I peaked at the perfect time.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem. I think, everybody puts this, you got to work hard, which is great. But if you work hard in January, February, like, I don't want you in your best shape in March and April. I need you to be in your best shape leading into that season. That's what training camp's built for. So the way I always looked at it is I'm using each month of the off season to prepare you for what's coming up next. Whether I was in the facility in the NFL or out of it, I knew I had to have you ready for April for the OTAs and get ready for the mandatory mini camps. Like, I knew that it was building blocks. But if you try to throttle, 22 to 36-year-old people, like, some people are going to break in that time. So you've got to be smart with how you dose the workload.
Yeah. And that was always my thing, was I'll go hard, but like, as long as I can, give me the recovery so I can go hard the next day and the next day and the next day. It's these coaches that will just like drive you into the dirt in training camp. And then you hit the season and you're like, dude, I'm wrecked. Yeah. I mean, what coach I'm talking about. We don't have to say his name, but
yeah, you don't have your legs, or you just don't feel like you can be you. And that's one thing I never want to do. I never want my workouts to not allow you to go do what you need to do on the field.
Yeah.
Whether that was for practice, because for me, practice is like, those are those technical and tactical reps that you have to get. And if I've smashed you, I learned this in the MMA game. I would put a hard workout on our fighters, and then the wrestling coach would call me up. He goes, dude, the guys looked awful today. What'd you do to them? And so I realized at that point in time, like, my bias or my workload that I put on them actually hurt them for the technical, tactical sessions that protects them and allows them to win. So it's a series of trade-offs during the time of the year of which levers you push and pull to get the right workload.
And you know what? You said it, the communication. You communicated, like, I love Trevor. You set me up with Trevor, and I love that dude. Like, he took my striking to another level. Like, I took that onto the field with the pass rushing and creating angles, and it was just next level. And his coaching ability just to be a coach is like elite. You know what I mean? I always say that about you too, that you're like one of the best coaches. Like, when it comes to coaching and what a coach is about, that's like Loren Landow should be like your name should be right there.
I appreciate that,
because it is elite, brother. And it's, things that you would say to me, like, don't sacrifice I say that to my kids. Don't sacrifice what you want the most for what you want right now. You used to say that to me because I was such a wild boy. I was so wild. You'd just be like, dude, quit partying. Yep. And I'm like, all right, fine, I will.
Dude, there's a lot of those conversations I've had over the years with other players too. You weren't the only one.
I know it. But it was just like incredible to me. It's incredible to me that you understand, like, you don't have such an ego that you're not going to communicate with other coaches and let them know, like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing this day so I can do it? I can change it up and make it so that we're being the most efficient we possibly can. And I think that's the hard part about the NFL, is the communication sometimes isn't there because you have to communicate between the head coach, the position coaches, and then you have to communicate with the training room, which is like the medical staff. And then and then it goes to the strength coach. So you have all of these people that have to be on the same page. And when they're not, it is a nightmare.
Yeah, it's tough, right? The way I've always looked at it is like, you have to have an athlete-centered approach. And if I sit there and I look at you, Derek Wolfe, and I have to sit there and say, okay, between strength and conditioning, nutrition, athletic training, position coach, coordinator, like, we all have to be on the same page to maximize your ability so you're the best on Sunday. And I think sometimes, like, there's just so much information, from data and from practice, and you're just trying to, you're intaking water a lot of times. This is like drinking through the fire hose, that you got to find those windows where you're all able to sit down and talk really on the best behalf of the player. So if you make it an athlete-centered room, that's when it works beautifully.
Well, we know that we had catapult, right? The catapult that we'd wear, and that would pretty much tell you how much work output you were doing, right? So it gave you what your speeds were, your explosive movements, like what if you were redlining, where your heart rate was for most of the day. And when you have a head coach that says we don't believe in science and we're just going to ignore all that, it blows my mind, because why wouldn't we use it reminds me of like the Rocky movie, right? Like you got Rocky in there. He's just training in the mountains and doing all this other dumb stuff. There's no way that he wins that fight in real life. This guy's taking steroids. This Russian is taking steroids and has every piece of equipment and scientist behind it. Like he would have been so perfectly dialed in that he would have smashed his face in. Like it would have never, it's not unrealistic, but that's the way I look at it, is like, if you're really that naive to think that the science behind this stuff isn't real and the data doesn't show, like, look, if you give me 3 days in a row and I'm like redlining it all 3 days, that fourth day I'm going to be trashed.
Yeah.
And then when the season gets here, you're going to see a lot of injuries coming. You're going to see, I mean, especially as the end of the season gets there, because the real season doesn't start till November. You got to be good leading up to that, but when November hits, you got to be reaching that peak, and then January, February peak, win a Super Bowl, and that's how we did it. That's how we did it the year that we won it. We had Luke Richardson, who was great.
Yep.
And so I was seeing you and Luke, and it was like I was getting the best of both worlds, and you guys were actually communicating at that time, remember?
Yeah, I'd reach out to Luke and say, okay, what'd the guys do? Because if you remember, I was seeing probably 6 to 7 players on that defense that year as well. They would come into me, and I wasn't going to put my ego in the way. I was like, hey, tell me what you guys did. And if I didn't hear from Luke in time, then I would just ask you guys, and I'd work around the things that you've already done. So to me, it wasn't about like, let me prove how hard I can work you. Let me fill in some gaps. That was the goal. But you bring up a good point. I've always believed in 3 pillars. There's technical, tactical, and physiological, right? Whether it's the fight game or if it's football. Those first 2, like, that's a coach's eye. A head coach, a position coach, they understand technically and tactically what they need from you in preparation for game week. Physiologically, we have to look at that as well, right? We need to look at the catapult and all the science. And I've always felt that what a good scripted program from a head coach does, all the catapult data does, or all the science data does, it really just illuminates outliers.
Yeah.
Hey, this guy's worked a little bit too much. This guy hasn't done enough. And so it really illuminates that. But typically, like, a good eye of a coach knows what a well-prepared team looks like. Mm-hmm. I will say in the fight game, what I'd always see is, before everybody got on the same page, is the wrestling coach felt he had to take care of your conditioning. The striking coach felt he had to take care of your conditioning. The jiu-jitsu coach felt he had to do the same. And then you have the strength and conditioning coach doing the same. So you had 4 coaches who were smashing an athlete. And at the end of the day, it's like, that doesn't help anybody.
Right.
And so the thing that you're going after, you're actually hurting it. Mm-hmm. So until the communication comes out and you can use some of the science and the data, like, that's what really helps drive the program. And it comes back to like open-mindedness in the communication.
Yeah. And that's a different way to think about it, because a lot of strength coaches are meathead guys that just want to crush you.
They just think, what do I need to do in my room?
Yeah.
What do I need to do in my room, when you have to look at it all?
They want the credit. It's ego, because everybody wants the credit. Most strength coaches have they're all crazy to me. Like, I always get it. I'm always like, get along with the strength coach too, because we're all crazy as hell. But and I'm a meathead myself.
You're a meathead.
I am. I loved training so much. Like, that's my favorite part of the game, is training for it. Like, I loved it. I loved finding little things I'd get better at. And things like, oh, you'd have me hold a medicine ball and come out of my stance and fire that medicine ball. And I noticed that my get off got better and my punch was better. And it's like, oh shit, okay, this stuff actually, when you can actually take it and see it work, that's whenever you know that your coach is doing the right things. Like, I always say Bill Cole, our best defensive line coach ever.
100%.
Because he would tell you something, you'd go and it would work. If you just did what he said, it would work. Like, if you just listen to the guy, he's one of those coaches where if you just do what he says, you're going to be a good player.
Bill made people great.
Oh, he made average players good. He made good players great. And he made great players like J.J. Watt, unbelievable.
Yep, legendary players.
And that's just a few of the guys that he's coached. He's so unbelievable.